Welcome to the International Civil Rights Center and Museum's 2024 Kwanzaa Lecture Series. I am Sage Chioma, and we welcome you, and we are thankful that you have chosen to join us for this year's Kwanzaa Lecture Series. We have presenters who will be speaking each night on the Nguso Saba. Each night, one of the presenters will pick on a selected principle of that day, and they will talk to you about how they incorporate, integrate, and utilize these principles on a daily basis to build and empower our community. Each speaker brings a unique view and experience that collectively will definitely be enlightening and give you a whole nother perspective on how to incorporate these principles for 365 days of the year. Habarigani, what is the word? That is the traditional greeting for Kwanzaa. It asks the question in Swahili, what is the word? So each day when people meet, that is their greeting. Our word for the first day of Kwanzaa today is Umoja, unity. To strive for and maintain unity in the family, community, nation, and race. I'd like to introduce our very first speaker opening our Kwanzaa series, Dr. Jelani M. Favors. Dr. Favors is a passionate educator, an award-winning author, and the Henry E. Fry Distinguished Professor of History of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, where he also serves as the inaugural director of the Center of Excellence for Social Justice. He has received major fellowships in support of his research, which include an appointment as a Humanities Writ Large Fellow at Duke University in 2013. He was an inaugural recipient of the Mellon HBCU Fellowship at the John Hope Franklin Humanities Institute at Duke in 2009. The International Civil Rights Center and Museum is proud to present, speaking on the principle of Umoja, Dr. Jelani M. Favors.
Greetings, everyone. It is my honor to stand in this sacred space here in downtown Greensboro and help us celebrate and welcome the first day of Kwanzaa. Today, we honor the principle of Umoja, which translates into unity. And so when we talk about this sense of unity, we know that in many ways that's a mythical term. No one's ever always on the same page. Even during the Civil Rights Movement, from the space in which we are speaking from right now here at the lunch counters at the downtown Greensboro, at the Woolworths, at the museum, there was never full unity. But there always was a sense of purpose and direction, and the idea that, again, one person alone cannot achieve greatness. Four people alone can't achieve greatness. They needed a February the 2nd. They needed their classmates and other students from across the country to join in a show of unity. And in that sense, unity is probably one of the most important principles of Kwanzaa. In 1865, Black folks emerged from the shadows of slavery with great hopes for reconnecting with our loved ones who had been violently ripped from the arms of their families and sold away. We had great hopes that new amendments that ended chattel slavery and gave African Americans the mantle of citizenship and granted Black men the right to vote would usher in a new era of opportunity. Yet the historical period known as Reconstruction proved to be one of the bloodiest chapters in our nation's history, and white terrorism and the betrayal of our civil and human rights became normalized and a core part of the American narrative. In the midst of World War I, African Americans had great hopes that our participation in the struggle for a war that was billed as one to defend and expand democracy would usher in a new era that recognized Black valor and finally vanquish race hatred and discriminatory practices in all walks of life. The great historian and philosopher W.E.B. Du Bois encouraged us to close ranks with the hopes that things would be different as the Great War came to a close. Instead, Black America was greeted with an unprecedented year of racial hatred and violence known as the Red Summer of 1919. The hearts of black folks yet again swelled with great anticipation and hope in the post-World War II era as we declared that we would have double victory against Nazism and communism abroad, but also turn back our enemies at home that lynched and disenfranchised us, that derided and dehumanized us, and trapped us in overcrowded and under-resourced communities. We declared separate and equal was unconstitutional in 1954, only to have Emmett Till snatched from us in 1955. In 1960, we launched sit-in movements from the very space that I'm speaking to you now, only to be rebuffed and delayed throughout the decade. One of our greatest warriors, Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, spoke boldly in 1964 and told the country that the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party was not seated at the Democratic National Convention that convened in Atlantic City, that she questioned America. The MFDP was not seated. I call upon other ancestors who have sifted through the anguish of delay and dismay to testify this evening. One of our most powerful writers, Langston Hughes, raised the poignant and ever-pressing question: what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Does it sag like a heavy load, or does it explode? So we raise this question, and it is a question that I know that is on the hearts and minds of many black folks in America at this moment that we are in. Like many people within our communities, these last few months have been difficult for me in our efforts to translate and make sense of this principle and how it has shown up in our lives and within our political discourse. The pendulum that swings between hope and doubt has been a lingering characteristic of the black experience in America. In spite of this fluctuating pattern that has defined our historical trajectory in this nation, I think it's important to note that some of our most tragic and darkest moments in America have produced surges of unity within our people. And my friends, this is where our faith should lie as we approach yet another crossroads in the struggle for black liberation. In my book, entitled Shelter in a Time of Storm, How Black Colleges Fostered Generations of Leadership and Activism, I was privileged to take the long journey through the black experience by charting the history of these storied institutions from their launching point in 1837. One of the major arguments that I make in my book examines a second curriculum that was forged within these sacred spaces. Yes, historically, black colleges taught math and science, history, and Latin, and practically all the other coursework that was offered at their predominantly white institution counterparts. But it was a second curriculum that deliberately countered the effects of white supremacist society that set black colleges apart, and ultimately powered social and political movements that reshaped the contours of American democracy. This second curriculum was comprised of race consciousness, idealism, and cultural nationalism. Black educators fundamentally understood that it would be impossible to transform the minds of black youth if they embraced and internalized the narrative that they were second-class citizens and worthy of servitude and dehumanization. They also understood that they had a racial responsibility to embed a sense of service within the students under their charge. The great Benjamin E. Mays wrote in his autobiography that it, quote, did his soul good to attend historically black South Carolina State University, where he was exposed for the first time to an all-Negro school and a Negro president. Benny Mays went on to raise up generations of men and leaders as president of Morehouse College. His former student, the great theologian Howard Thurman, reflected on the obligation impressed upon him by black educators when he highlighted the sense of mission and inspiration that he received. To quote, to keep alive our responsibility to the many, many others who had not been fortunate enough to go to college. Civil rights icon Ella Baker, a graduate of Shaw University in Raleigh, declared, quote, "The school de-emphasized individualism and stressed community service. Where I went to school, you went there to give the best of yourselves to others, rather than to extract from other people for your own benefit." W.E.B. Du Bois, Charles Johnson, Benjamin Quarles, Margaret Walker, Toni Morrison, all part of a vast array of HBCU scholars and alumni who left towering legacies of scholarship, intellectualism, and service that still light a beacon unto our feet. Black colleges also imbued black students with a sense of idealism. In spite of America's hypocrisy and betrayal, black youth at HBCUs were constantly drilled in the concepts of democracy and citizenship. In cities like Greensboro, it was black youth at Bennett College that launched voter registration drives such as Operation Door Knock, while listening to speeches from campus visitors such as Ella Baker that propelled them to dream and imagine of what America could be instead of focusing solely on the nightmare that America was for millions of black Americans who were voteless but not hopeless. One of my favorite authors, and one of my favorite people that I encountered in this study was Margaret Walker, who was a longtime professor of English at Jackson State University, a celebrated poet, a product of the Harlem Renaissance. But in her diaries, she talked about this idea of ceasing to live and beginning to be. In fact, she inscribed, "When will we cease to live and begin to be?" This idea of becoming has always been an important part of these black spaces that we've cultivated and crafted. The idea of radical imagination, creating spaces where black folks could simply love, where they could simply exist, where they could simply be, right, and not have their humanity questioned, was vital in these movements that emerged from spaces like the ones that surround us. There's no way that the Anti-4 could have come in here as freshmen, 18 years old, 19 years old, and believed that something that they were doing was something that was righteous, something that was timely, something that was needed, if they did not first believe in themselves, right? So this sense of believing in oneself, this sense of having a space where you could radically imagine what can be in this country, right? A more tolerant, beautiful, sacred space. This is what black institutions have given us. These are the movements that have emerged from these spaces, and this is why these spaces are so valuable to us today as we stand at this crossroads of American life. When the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones announced that she was spurning UNC Chapel Hill's offer to join their faculty after their attempt to deny her tenure, she said that she was instead heading to Howard University, where she could work to, quote, "build up our own." Nicole Hannah-Jones was simply mirroring the long tradition that black folks have established of pouring their talents and resources back into spaces that celebrated them instead of denying their humanity. Indeed, black colleges for years played perhaps the most vital role in creating what the community used to refer to as race men and race women. Black citizens who took racial responsibility to champion, build, and defend black spaces in an effort to elevate freedom dreams of black people. They gave us a blueprint that was built on the concept of unity. In 1869, Fannie Jackson Coppin was appointed to serve as the first female principal of what would ultimately become Cheyney State University, the first HBCU in America. In her memoirs published in 1913, Coppin responded to the exploitation of black labor and the broken dreams of black Americans who were constantly rebuffed and dismayed at the hostilities of a white supremacist society. "Teach the millions of poor colored laborers of the South how much power they have in themselves," declared Coppin. "The people of the South, it is true, cannot produce hundreds of dollars, but they have millions of pennies. And millions of pennies make tens of thousands of dollars. By clubbing together and lumping their pennies, a fund might be raised in the cities of the South that the poorer classes might fall back upon while their crops are growing, or else by the opening of cooperative stores. become their own creditors, and so effectively rid themselves of their merciless extortioners, end quote. Coppin declared this in the midst of what historian Rayford Logan referred to as the nadir, the lowest point of race relations, where Jim Crow became crystallized in American life and racial violence was ubiquitous and unchecked. Nevertheless, her call for black folks to unify in their efforts to resist white supremacy and to empower themselves was the epitome of what race women like herself were called to do. We can look towards local examples as well. Race men and women in cities like Greensboro poured into the hearts and minds of black youth and reminded them that they were crucial components in the fight for black liberation. As a grad student in 1999, I had the privilege to interview Jabril Kazan, formerly known as Ezell Blair, and one of the ANT4, who launched the sit-in movement here in 1960. In this interview, Kazan recalled that, quote, they were living a lie in their thinking that because of our color, we were unintelligent and that we knew nothing. But these things had been taught to us by the time we were in grade school. It was our teachers in the segregated school system that told us that they were preparing us for the day that we would be free and that we were going to be the leaders of that freedom. This is before Martin Luther King Jr. came along and Rosa Parks came along. This is what I was taught in the school system in Greensboro. Kazan reminds us that black folks have always found ways to create enclaves, shelters in a time of storm that gave mission and dignity and purpose during our darkest hour. Within these spaces, radical imagination was unleashed and movements were born. During the mass jail-ins that took place in this city during the early 60s, black folks took to the streets that surround this very building that I speak to you from today. Students, teachers, doctors, janitors, domestics, PhDs, and no-Ds. So to my listeners, and particularly to members of the black community who feel betrayed and dismayed at recent political developments, know this: our people have survived far worse. They did so by consciously creating race men and women who built and invested in black institutions and organizations. In doing so, they fostered a spirit of unity and created a great sense of faith that tomorrow would be better than today. Like our ancestors, we must continue to build up our own. We must continue to fight that good fight and disavow whatever colorism, sexism, and classism that seek to push us apart. We are not a monolithic people, but we must be united in our efforts to lift and love one another and forge a path towards building a beloved community that will sustain and uplift us for generations to come. Recently, here in Greensboro, the beloved community convened the North Carolina Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission Summit that brought people from all over the state of North Carolina to talk about what's next. We had labor leaders, we had teachers, we had civil rights activists coming together from all walks of life, from all races, to talk about how do we chart a path forward. One of the things that arose during that conversation was a sense of hope, was a sense of dedication, that the work that we continue to see, the work that has always been around us, must go on. And in that regards, unity has been a principle that can still guide us, that can still lift us, that can still give us hope moving forward. Like many African Americans growing up in the 1970s and 1980s, Kwanzaa was not something that was openly celebrated or even discussed on a national scale. There were pockets of celebration of Kwanzaa that began to take place all around the country. I did not grow up in one of those pockets, but I entered into one of those pockets as an undergraduate student at North Carolina A&T State University, and it's there as an undergrad that I became more exposed to the principles of Kwanzaa, the celebration of Kwanzaa, and ultimately I had opportunity to meet the founders of Kwanzaa as well. as a student at North Carolina A&T State University. This gave me a sense of understanding of why this holiday was so important. It wasn't some sort of manufactured excuse. It was not some sort of alternative to Christmas. It was an effort to celebrate all these incredible principles that Black folks live on a daily basis, to bring them all together for a sense of purpose and for a sense of meaning, and more importantly, to focus us as we enter into the new year. And so I left North Carolina A&T State University in 1997 and went to grad school at Ohio State University in 1997, and I entered into this Black Studies program where certainly Kwanzaa was something that we talked about a lot during the holiday season. We would have Kwanzaa celebrations. Many of my friends and peers would have Kwanzaa dinners during the end of the semester. So I had opportunity to meet Professor Karinga as a grad student as well as an undergrad. And so again, you meet these people that you study about. It's the same thing as, when I had opportunity to interview Ezell Blair Jr. These are icons. These are people who are towering figures within the struggle for Black liberation. So you kind of feel small when you come up upon them, meeting these people, but they very, very quickly disabuse you of any of those sense of inferiority. They embrace you, they love you. And Karinga is a constant fixture on the academic circuit. I've seen him at the National Council of Black Studies conferences. I've had the opportunity to talk to him at these conferences. Extremely approachable, extremely warm, and more importantly, humble to know that something that he and his family created has sustained over the years, has grown over the years, and has resonated within the hearts and minds of Black people in this country. I wish you and yours a happy Kwanzaa, and may the principles that we celebrate during this holiday be abundant in our lives for the new year that lies before us.
We thank you for joining us this evening. My favorite part of that presentation is when Dr. Jelani Favors tied it all together with the optimism that our ancestors were able to endure while imagining a world and what it could be as opposed to what their day-to-day experiences were. Be sure to tune in each day of Kwanzaa as you will hear each presenter, just like Dr. Jelani Favors, give you a perspective of how they practice the principles of Kwanzaa in their daily lives. See you tomorrow.